Our lesson of Scripture this morning comes to us from 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I'll be reading verses 18 through 25. Hear now the reading of God's holy word. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since, in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided, through the foolishness of our proclamation, to those who believe, to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
When Paul wrote these words to the church in Corinth, you get the idea that everybody was having a problem understanding the cross. If you get that impression, you got the right impression. The cross is so obvious to us. It's hard to comprehend people not getting it. We display crosses in all sorts of ways. We wear them. We put them by the roadside sometimes if somebody we care about died in an accident. Some people put them on hillsides so folks driving by on the road can see them. Even non-believers understand the cross as something that a good man, Jesus Christ, died on. It's one of the most commonly recognized symbols of our time. But that wasn't the way it was in Paul's day. We can go to Walmart, we can go to Target, we can go to online jewelry stores, and the choices in crosses, sizes, colors, the kind of jewelry it's made into are absolutely countless. There was no thought about wanting to have a cross to display in any way in Jesus' day. The aim I have this morning is for us to take this very common symbol, the cross that we see all the time, and appreciate it in its terrible magnificence and understand it as one of God's defining moments in His relationship with us. To do that, we need to, in our minds, go back to a world that doesn't exist anymore, when Rome was at the height and power of its glory, and everyone deferred the Roman power, except for one little country that was kind of tucked over at the end of the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine, inhabited by a people called the Jews, who were very independent-minded and who were of a rebellious mindset, and there was burning within them the hope for a Messiah that was going to come and change all of that. And the Messiah that they were expecting was no Prince of Peace. They wanted a sword-wielding revolutionary who would overthrow Roman power. Scripture says that when the time was right, Jesus came. And that's the time in history, out of all the other times there were, that God picked to send Jesus to offer this new revelation of Himself. And that day was called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It was 200 years of unprecedented peace in the Western world. Hard to imagine 200 years of peace. We can't hardly make it 200 days, it seems like anymore. If there was ever good news, a good time to spread the good news around, this was it. Because for the first time, a network of highways had been built all around the civilized world, and they never had that before. The Mediterranean Ocean had basically been turned into a Roman lake. All the pirates had been cleared out of it. Blackbeard or Captain Jack Sparrow would not have lasted very long. They would have been in Davy Jones' locker. You could take the roads and travel in safety around the empire. You could go anywhere on the Mediterranean Ocean. You could catch a boat and move across and not have fear for your safety. It was a moment when, it was a perfect moment for Jesus' disciples and people like the Apostle Paul to spread out and move around the empire in safety and freedom to share the message of Jesus, His cross and the resurrection. And that's the moment Scriptures tell us that God chose. And one of the things that God chose as a part of all of this was to use the Roman cross as part of what He was doing. This is ironic that the greatest period of quiet in the history of civilization, 200 years, was maintained at a cost. It was maintained by Roman steel and the power of Roman legions. And it was punctuated by the use of the Roman cross to maintain justice and instill a fear into the heart of every person in the empire, that you needed to be nice and quiet and peaceable, or the cross was there if you crossed certain lines. The modern world, what do we use? We use lethal injections. Tried the electric chair for a while. There are some cultures that use hanging to enforce their justice. Firing squads are getting pretty rare. ISIS tried to bring back beheadings, but hopefully we're done with that. Rome used the cross, and they used it probably more effectively than any other civilization ever was used any instrument of death to enforce their laws. They crucified in public places. Somebody had transgressed against the law. They crucified them on a public road, a warning to everybody who came by. You need to toe the line, or this could happen to you. The cross provided a very painful death. It was feared, it was ugly, it was degrading, it was kind of a disgusting thing. And by that cross, Rome maintained its power through the fear of it. And God chooses that. So it's no wonder Paul needed to explain it. Paul wrote to them, the problem with the cross is that the Greeks desire wisdom and the Jews demand signs. What in the world is Paul talking about? When he said the Greeks desire wisdom, there are two things. One, for the Greeks, religion was really much more of a head trip. The other thing was that the Greeks kind of understood that all of their gods and goddesses stayed on Mount Olympus. And they just kind of enjoyed being around with one another. The guys stood around and kicked tires, I don't know, on the chariot. The women, the goddesses, get their nails and their hair done. And they were very much totally divorced from what was going on down on earth. They occasionally looked over, and if they decided to have some fun and entertain themselves, they did things. The Greeks believed that the best way to live was to keep your head down and not do anything that might irritate the gods. Because as long as the gods were up there enjoying one another, that you were better off here on earth, that if the gods took notice of anything that was going on down here on earth, that there was nothing good much that was going to come out of it. The cross was absolutely incomprehensible to Greek thinking and Greek culture, because a God who would come to earth was unimaginable, and a God who was willing to feel pain, to suffer, it just didn't compute. So Paul had his work cut out for him when he was traveling around trying to explain the cross of Christ. He called it a thing of foolishness to the Greeks. It just ran against everything in their grain and thinking. Then he called it a stumbling block to the Jews, because he said the Jews demand signs. When the time for the Messiah came, the Jews believed that the Messiah is going to express himself in wonders, not in crosses. And Jesus came, and he did work wonders. But the Jews believed that the wonder that the Messiah was really going to perform was a successful rebellion against Rome, and that we would reestablish Israel. So their thought was that the way the kingdom was coming was going to be on earth. Thought of a kingdom in heaven was not something they had much interest in. Deferred gratification? No, they wanted it right now and right here, and the Messiah would do it when he came. Cross doesn't figure into that kind of thinking. God has something new to share with humanity about himself. So he needs to find a new way to share that. And what's he trying to share about himself? The depth of his love, the extent of his caring, and he picks the cross and shows his love like we have never seen it, experienced it before. From being the lowliest, most despised sight on the horizon in the day in which God chose the cross, it has gone to being the universal symbol of amazement and wonder, an expression of the great mystical power of God to make himself present in our lives and in our world. It is an honor to wear a cross. It is an honor to have a cross by the side of the road. It is an honor to have a cross on the front of your church. Things have changed because God took the worst thing there was in his society, in Jesus' society 2,000 years ago, and turned it into a symbol of his love and his power. And that's what we need to connect with as we move toward Holy Week. It's a week that changed the world, and it's a week that we need to let change our lives. It's a time to focus on what the cross means for us and what the cross has done for us. Ugly, designed by Roman technology, by the way you used it, to squeeze the life out of a person, 1 minute at a time, like taking an hourglass and letting the sands drop. To kill somebody in the most painful, spread out, extended kind of way. And in a sense, the worst person who ever lived really didn't deserve to die in that kind of a way. But God took what the worst person in the world didn't deserve and used it, and the best person who ever lived died that kind of death in that kind of way. Because the wisdom of God, the love of God, the power of God took the ugliest thing on the face of the earth and turned it into an instrument of grace and the way of our salvation. Let that make the difference in your life. And be grateful that our God cared enough about us to come to us and bring us salvation. Amen.